Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to... I almost said the wrong thing. I almost said Mythgard and Middle-earth, but it's not my Griffwood stream. Welcome back to Exploring the Lord of the Rings. And we are at session number 64 here today. And back for an encore session in two senses. One sense, of course, I got so carried away talking about my favorite Tolkien poem last week, which was a super fun session, by the way. That was like one of my, I don't know, maybe top 5 favorite, like most fun sessions I've had in years. That was so great. I was so glad for those of you who could join me in that. But anyway, we had so much fun I didn't have time for a field trip. So we're back on the Crick Hollow server this week so that we will do our field trip with Crick Hollow folks, because that was not fair to show up to the Crick Hollow server and then not do our field trip there. So we'll do that. But of course, it is also the an encore in the sense of we're going to talk about the poem more. Well, okay, sort of. We're not going to talk about that poem more. I'm done talking about the poem, but we're going to talk about the prose discussion right afterwards. So we're going to pick up back on what I said last time. So remember, we did the poem. Now we're going to look at it when Aragorn does his little prose exposition at the end of the poem, right? So we're going to look at the next bit of the narrative after the poem. And then we're going to go back to poetry again. I want to go back and look at the early version of this poem, the sort of the first surviving version of this poem, and then talk a little bit about the context there, because it's really cool when you kind of look into the background of this scene, this moment in the Fellowship of the Ring. It's a super rich moment in Tolkien's kind of writing career. So we're gonna look at an old version of this same poem. We'll do some comparison and contrast with the poem, with the sort of the modern version, right? The published version from the Fellowship of the Ring that we looked at last time. And then after that, we will be ready to move on. And of course, I have no aspirations about moving on until next week. So who knows? Maybe next week we will even get to the Attack of the Ringwraiths. Who knows? It could happen, right? So that'll be fun. Now, before I get started, one thing I wanted to emphasize: we have an exciting thing coming up, and we're starting to get close to it now. We're within a month of it, and that is Middlemoot in Kansas City. I wanted to make sure to draw everybody's attention to that. If you are anywhere, in that area near the center of the country, if you can get down to Kansas City, it's going to be an awesome time. This is our Middlemoot, our second annual Middlemoot. We were in Iowa last year. We're moving south now to Kansas City. And it's going to be awesome. Really, really great time. So I hope that you can join us. Again, these regional events are designed, they're simple one-day events. They don't cost very much, but it's an awesome day. Come out, lunch is included, and you'll have a great day hearing from some really interesting people, having some cool discussions. I'm going to be out there and giving a talk too, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, so I always look forward to meeting folks. Had a great time at Middlemoot last year. Looking forward to getting a chance to see a bunch of people, and hopefully a bunch of new people this year too. So if you can possibly make it, October 6th, Saturday, October 6th is the date. Go to signumuniversity.org, scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see the link there for the Middlemoot registration page. So anyway, just wanted to make sure to let you know that's coming up. And of course, after that is LA Moot in the area of Los Angeles. And that is October 27th, near the end of the month there. So that's what's up next after that. I would also mention that we are approaching one of the most exciting times of the year in the Signum and Mythgard world, and that is our annual fundraising campaign, which is going to be starting, as always, on Bilbo's birthday. We've been doing that now for, 5 years? I think this will be our 6th year doing it. So we're going to have a bunch of special things, both some special events, including special Lotro marathons, and also we're going to be doing some special sort of games and activities and giveaways and things during our regular class sessions here during the fundraising campaign as well. So more information on that will be coming up soon. But that fun time every year is approaching. So Exactly, Karita. Fundraising is the best time of the year. I've always loved the fundraising campaign and the traditional Lotro marathon that I do every year, which has been a lot of fun from when I did Helm's Deep last year, right? And got blown up in Helm's Deep, which was fantastic. And I did my ludicrous all the way through Moria in one sitting marathon the year before. So yeah, it's that's a really fun tradition. So I'm definitely going to do something like that again. I think I need to move Poor Wiggend along. I think this might be a let's get Poor Wiggend as far through Gondor as we possibly can marathon is kind of what I'm thinking might happen this year, but who knows? We'll see. We'll see what we can do. But all the way through Erebor. Yeah, well, it's going to be a little hard with my characters, I got to say. But anyway, yeah. So looking forward to that. So just wanted to let you know that is coming, that stuff is on its way. So awesome. Okay, so let's get back to poetry, because of course that's what everybody's here for, right? Well, no, prose first. Okay, so The Leaves of Many Years, which is of course a quote from the poem, we're talking about linden leaves last time, how Luthien's feet are compared to linden leaves, and the years of many leaves lying, the leaves of many years lying thick, is in the poem, and of course you can really see the leaves of many years when you look back in the history of this poem. But let's move on to the prose, as I said. So after we finish the poem, this is what we get next. Strider sighed and paused before he spoke again. That is a song, he said, in the mode that is called Anthenoth among the elves, but it is hard to render in our common speech, and this is but a rough echo of it. It tells of the meeting of Beren, son of Barahir, and Luthien Tinuviel. Beren was a mortal man, but Luthien was the daughter of Thingol, a king of elves upon Middle-earth when the world was young, and she was the fairest maiden that has ever been among all the children of this world. As the stars above the mists of the northern lands was her loveliness, and in her face was a shining light. In those days the great enemy, of whom Sauron of Mordor was but a servant, dwelt in Angband in the north, and the elves of the west, coming back to Middle-earth, made war upon him to regain the Silmarils which he had stolen, and the fathers of men aided the elves. But the enemy was victorious, and Barahir was slain, and Beren, escaping through great peril, came over the mountains of terror into the hidden kingdom of Thingol in the forest of Neldereth. There he beheld Luthien singing and dancing in a glade beside the enchanted river Esgalduin, and he named her Tinuviel, that is, nightingale, in the language of old. Many sorrows befell them afterwards, and they were parted long. Tinuviel rescued Beren from the dungeons of Sauron, and together they passed through great dangers, and cast down even the great enemy from his throne, and took from his iron crown one of the 3 Silmarils, brightest of all jewels, to be the bride price of Luthien to Thingol, her father. Okay. Is anybody else having a problem getting the audio through Discord? Okay. The Discord audio is working for most people? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. Good. So let's think about this sort of synopsis that Aragorn gives us here, right, or gives to the hobbits. Now remember, let's recall the context. It started with Sam saying, well, remember, it started with Merry saying, hey, do you know any more of that song about Gil-galad? And Frodo being like, well, sort of. And then Aragorn saying, no, let's not tell that story. And Sam saying, but tell us some story from about the elves from before the fading time. And he says, I will tell you the tale of Tinuviel, and launches into the poem, right? And yeah, so Mike, absolutely. The Mike points out that the prose is all, blah, 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 none of them meeting. It's the opposite of the poem. It is the opposite of the poem. The poem has only that one stanza, which just kind of gestures at the wider story, right? The poem is all about the meeting of Beren and Luthien. That's of the 9 stanzas, 8 of them are about the 2 of them meeting, right? And it's only that last stanza that even points at it, but it doesn't even say specifically what it is, right? It doesn't even say specifically what it is that they did, or where they went, or what they accomplished. That's not what's important in the poem. And this is definitely part of the a big part of what Aragorn is doing here, right? He sort of realizes, in a sense, that the poem doesn't exactly, at least not fully, answer Sam's request, right? So he's going to flesh it out. He's going to contextualize it. So he gives the context. So Mike, you're absolutely right. What he gives us here in prose is the absolute mirror reverse, right? We get the one sentence in this whole paragraph, right? There he beheld Luthien singing and dancing in a glade, and he named her Tinuvio. That's it, right? That's all we get. That one sentence is like the summary of the entire poem, right? So let's stop it now. Yes. Let's see. People are talking about people are talking about Arwen here. I want to pick up on this for a second. Yes, when Tolkien wrote this section, no, he had not. Arwen did not exist when he wrote this section. Yeah, James is absolutely correct about that. Arwen is one of the latest additions to the entire Lord of the Rings. Arwen is added way at the end of almost absolutely everything, actually. The ring is destroyed before the character of Arwen is conceived. So that is, the narrative gets all the way up to that point. So yeah, I mean, Aragorn is a descendant of Beren and Luthien, right? And that's clear. But the personal relevance of this story, like the image, which is very difficult for us to escape, right, of Aragorn sitting here and singing about Beren and Luthien and thinking about Arwen, right, is not part of the original conception of this scene. Now, that's not to say it's inappropriate. This is one of the things that Tolkien was so good at doing, which is going back and retconning the prose that he had already written, and just by adding one thing, and in this case, of course, adding nothing to the text at all, right? The text is exactly the same as it was, but by having added the concept of Strider, of Aragorn and Arwen, right? That concept now retroactively informs this scene and adds this extra layer of richness of characterization onto it, right? So, I mean, it's brilliant how this does, and you can see how this sort of led us to, this sort of led him to do that in the first place, right? Like why it seemed fitting that in the end Aragorn should be part of a sort of the final recapitulation of the Beren and Luthien story, right, in his own relationship with Arwen. You can kind of see how that came in, because it fits really well, right? But no, it's not part of the original thing. So we shouldn't ignore it because we're talking about the published text as a published text. The fact that he hadn't thought of it yet when he wrote it doesn't mean it's not relevant to this passage. However, it is a good reason not to focus only on that, right? And if when we are hearing this passage and hearing his song and hearing him recite, and then hearing his character, his prose after this here, if in doing this all we're hearing is like, or we're just imagining him being like Arwen, we're kind of missing at least a big chunk of the point, right? Because it wasn't written for that purpose. So obviously there's more there than only that. Yeah, exactly. JJ says that Arwen is added at the end of all things, and Tarloniel notes that that's appropriate for the even star, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, John Castles was thinking the same thing. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, so let's oh, sorry, I see a little discussion about the recording from last week. No, it's not on YouTube yet, and that's totally my fault. It will be soon. I apologize. I had a really busy week and then was traveling all weekend, and I didn't get my files posted in the place where I was supposed to post them. So totally my fault. We'll get there. Anyway, okay. So with that in mind, let's do the forget about Arwen for a second exercise. Again, I'm not saying it's inappropriate to be thinking about Arwen here, because it's totally appropriate, but I want to be thinking about other things as well, right? Now, Corey Schwab, right? I love that Strider starts with a poem and only after that provides the backstory for all of history, pretty much. Yes, puts it in this wider context. I agree. The fact that he could have done it the other way around, right? He could have started off and been like, I'm going to tell you about the meeting of Beren, son of Barahir, and Luthien Tenuvio. Beren was a mortal man, right? And he starts with the exposition, and then he's like, okay, so here's the poem. And then he does it, right? But I agree. I think it's much more effective the other way. Especially since it sets, I think, a really important tone. Because here's my biggest question for this whole passage, right? Why is Aragorn telling this story? Why? Why this story instead of another one, right? I mean, Sam asked him for a story of the elves before the fading time. Why this one? Why does this one help? Why is this one relevant? Why is it appropriate in this moment? Here they are in the dell under Weathertop. The darkness is pressing in close, as Sam points out. Strider probably knows or suspects that the Ringwraiths themselves are like not far away. It seems to me entirely likely that the Ringwraiths can actually hear Aragorn's story here. I would not be the least bit surprised if they're actually in earshot pretty much this whole time. So why this story? Now, hang on. When I ask that question, why does he choose this story? What is the relevance of this story? Don't just brainstorm with the story. Focus on the text, right? What answer does Aragorn give for that? Looking at his, so we get two things, right? First, we've got the poem itself. So let's go to the point that Corey Schwab was making, right? That we have the poem first, right? So just the poem. What's the message of the poem? What's the relevance? Why is it that he wants to sing this song to the hobbits when, for instance, the Song of the Fall of Gil-galad would not have done, right? Apparently, as he says. Another way of asking this question: what does the poem do, right? What's it about? Now, it's true, Stephen and Catriona, that it shows that the enemy can be defeated, but that's not what the poem is about at all. The poem doesn't even mention that, right? As we were talking about, it obliquely refers to the fact that they go into darkness and pass out of it, and then wander about the forest singing sorrowless, right? It's an expression of hope, Marianne says. Yes, it's about joy after sorrow. Yes, good. Remember the way that the poem starts, right? Remember those first couple stanzas? The first stanza in particular, when we see Luthien dancing, and it's us seeing Luthien dancing, right? We are kind of peeking through the leaves and seeing Luthien dancing in the glade, and then Beren comes in. The way in which our relationship with Luthien there, right? Our perception of Luthien at the beginning of the poem is paralleled with Beren's, right? You can see Strider in his rendition, right, of this song is bringing the reader in, very much bringing the reader into Beren's sort of point of view here, right? So Beren sees light in the shadow. Yes. He sees, right, light and high beauty. JJ, forever beyond the shadow's reach. Yes. Now, again, this doesn't explicitly talk about it being beyond the shadow's reach, except, again, that last stanza, in the forest singing sorrowless, right? The final note of the song does suggest about being beyond the shadow's reach, right? But anyway, so remember Beren's situation at the beginning of the poem, right? He's wandering, he's lonely, he's weary, all those things about him. So there's, you don't want to go too far with it, obviously, but it's a relevant story for weary, scared, lonely travelers in a strange country, right? So there's a certain relevance for the hobbits, right, in that scene. And look what happens with Beren. So in a sense, what happens with Beren, I mean, yes, it's a romance story. So, it's a love story. So, I mean, you could say, well, that's not necessarily super relevant because probably none of the hobbits are going to have this particular experience that Beren has. It would be a pretty big implicit promise to make to parallel them very closely with Beren and Beren's experience there. But again, obviously, that's not the point, right? In a sense, what happens with Beren in the sense of finding love, right? Finding a wife, is not really the main point of it, I would say, right? I mean, that does happen, and that's important for him personally, but it's not really the point of, it's not really the emphasis of the story, right? Remember, the poem is all about the changing of the seasons, right? It's all about light and darkness. It's all about life and death in the sense of growing and dying, right? With the fading of this, through autumn and into winter, and the leaves falling to the ground, right? And everything being dead, including Beren's soul again, in desolation and loneliness as he's waiting and searching and looking, and then the spring leaps forth, right, when she returns. It's about love, and it's a love story, but it's more than just a love story, right? Mike says it's the only real victory east of the sea in the first age. Even if the poem doesn't detail it, it's still in the mood. Yes, it is, Mike. But again, see, what I would emphasize here is that, is it about victory over darkness? Yes, it is, but very indirectly in one sense, right? Or maybe I would say this in a different way. I think the way I would say this is the story of Beren finding Luthien, and, most importantly, Luthien turning and you catastrophically putting her hand in his, right? Her enveloping him in her arms and within the shadow of her hair. That is the triumph of light over darkness. The joining together of the elf and the mortal man, the finding of light in the darkness and the curing of weariness and loneliness on the part of Beren, the renewal of life, right, which is morrowless and sorrowless, right? That's the heart of the whole story, in a sense. The defeating Sauron that happens with the help of Huon the Hound, and the casting of Melkor from his throne and cutting the Silmaril from his crown. Those are important, right? Those are big moments, but in a sense, those are almost just like a metaphor for what has already happened, right? You can say that the meeting of Beren and Luthien is like a metaphor, that. The description of them meeting in the woods is like a metaphor for the larger conquest of darkness that's going to happen later. But I would actually do it the other way around, right? Them casting Melkor from his throne is only making open and outward the victory that was already won, in a sense, by their union, right? By their joining, by their coming together, by his calling out her name and her coming and putting her hand in his, right? That's in essence, that's the Beren and Luthien story right there, right? Release from bondage, that's the release from bondage right there. The actual setting free from prisons that happens at various points along the way are like metaphors for that central thing, right? But again, the central thing, I think, is what we see in the poem, right? So now, but he has to now he does contextualize it, and he does sort of unpack it, right? And that's fine. That's also important, right? How is this applied? How is this relevant? Any words or phrases, anything that he says in this section that I have up on the screen jump out at you? You know, the passage I just read? Well, just like 15 minutes ago now. Any words or phrases jump out at you? There's one that makes me start every time I hear it. When he's explaining about Melkor, whom he doesn't name, just calls him the great enemy, right? Yeah, JJ, that's the phrase. In those days, the great enemy, of whom Sauron of Mordor was but a servant. Okay, Mr. Do not speak that name so loudly, right? I mean, what he just did is like way worse than anything that the rest of them did, right? This is not just mentioning Mordor, right? This is calling Sauron by his name, right? It's striking and also insulting him at the same time. Yeah, Trifle, I agree, but a servant really does stand out, right? Yeah, JJ says he's using Sauron's name as a burn. Yeah, exactly. Creating, Sauron of Mordor, as if he has to clarify which Sauron he's talking about. Yeah, exactly. So it's fascinating to me that in some sense, it's almost as if Aragorn feels that having recited the Beren and Luthien poem, or in the midst of this context of explaining the story of Beren and Luthien, he can not only name Mordor, but Sauron himself, and it's fine, right? He is not endangering them by doing this. Now, of course, you might say, well, part of the problem is that, you know, he might be thinking as far as secrecy is concerned and attracting the attention of the ringwraiths. You know, there's no sense closing the barn door after the horse has already left, right? The ringwraiths obviously know where they are. They're going to find them. This is why he was like, let's light a fire. And Sam's like, you know, that kind of show us up? And, you know, it's the best way to say, here we are that I know of, bar shouting. But obviously stealth is no longer what Aragorn is going for, right? He's going for protection, not stealth. But anyway, so maybe it's just that, but even in this context, he stopped them from talking about the fall of Gil-galad right when Frodo was about to start talking about Mordor, right? Yeah. And Balangsmond, it does seem to be about that. It does seem to me that he's sort of emphasized the lack of fear that he is showing, right? And this is where I think this is an important passage to remember when we start looking at, especially in Gondor, how they won't name the Dark One, right? And, there's this whole, like, he who must not be named thing going on in Gondor. Remember Aragorn just saying, of whom Sauron of Mordor was but a servant, possibly in the earshot of the ringwraiths, right? Yes, Ambrosius, I agree. It says, for me as a first-time reader, the revelation that Sauron himself had an evil master, that there was a bigger Dark Lord, was a shocking, scary revelation. Yes, absolutely, I agree. And the way that it makes all of this bigger stuff, right? This ancient history, those, these ancient days that Sam wanted to hear stories from, seem like everything was an order of magnitude bigger, right? Good. But anyway, okay, so let's summarize here briefly, because even for those of us who know the Silmarillion pretty well, this is a fairly high density of information that we're getting here, right? So let's look at his emphasis. It tells, that is the song that he just sang, tells of the meeting of Beren and Luthien. Beren was a mortal man, but Luthien was the daughter of Thingol, a king of elves. Okay, so he's emphasizing the gap between them in that sentence, right? Beren was a mortal man. Notice we're not told anything special about him. Beren, son of Barahir, whoever the heck that was, right? And he was a mortal man. That's what we're told, right? And Luthien was not only an elf, but the daughter of an elf, a king of elves. So, major social gap between Beren and Luthien is what he first emphasizes here. And P.S., she was the fairest maiden that has ever been among all the children of this world. So, okay. As the stars above the mists of the northern lands was her loveliness, and in her face was a shining light. All right. So this is not just about she was awful pretty, right? Notice how he is expanding on the theme, all that glimmering and shimmering language from the song, right? And he is emphasizing that. As the stars above the mists of the northern lands was her loveliness, and in her face was a shining light. Right? She is like the embodiment of light and hope. She is that star, right? You know, she is all of these things. Now, so what happens next? So she's the shining light. She is like the stars above the mists of the northern lands. In those days, the great enemy, of whom Sauron of Mordor was but a servant, dwelt in Angband, and the elves of the west coming back to Middle-earth made war upon him. So, context, okay, fighting a huge war with the big, big bad of whom Sauron was only a servant. Okay. They're trying to regain the Silmarils, which he had stolen. What are they? Who knows? Okay. And the fathers of men aided the elves. Great. Okay, so the men and the elves were allies. That's interesting. Good part of this big war to regain the Silmarils, whatever they are. But the enemy was victorious and Barahir was slain. Oh, this is becoming a downer now, Aragorn. That's interesting in the immediate context, right? So the enemy, the bad guys win, and the good guys are crushed underfoot. That's bad. And Beren, escaping through great peril, came over the mountains of terror into the hidden kingdom of Thingol in the forest of Neldoreth. There he beheld Luthien singing and dancing in a glade beside the enchanted river Esgalduin, and he named her Tinuvio, that is nightingale, in the language of old. Many sorrows befell them afterwards, and they were parted long. He immediately goes to their parting, right after mentioning their meeting and his naming of her, right? And so their story, okay, let me summarize their story after that. They had a lot of sorrows and were parted for a long time. Okay, that's also an interesting sort of downer note there, Aragorn. Tinuvio rescued Beren from the dungeons of Sauron, and together they passed through great dangers and cast down even the great enemy from his throne, and took from his iron crown one of the 3 Silmarils, brightest of all jewels, to be the bride price of Luthien to Thingol, her father. Interesting, you notice how all of this is, it sort of circles back around to their relationship in the end, right? Why did they do all these things, right? Why did that? So they you know, we just sort of got their resume together. They passed through. She rescues him. They pass through great dangers. They cast down the great enemy from his throne. They took from the Iron Crown one of the 3 Silmarils, brightest of all jewels. Oh, that's what the Silmarils are. To be the bride price of Luthien to Thingol, her father, right? Why did they did all these things together so that they could be together, right? So that Beren could be with the shining light, right? The one who, as the stars above the mists of the northern lands, was her loveliness. Yeah, JJ says, they're sort of like the Arkenstone that you may have heard Bilbo describe, though they're totally not the same thing. Yeah, exactly. Kind of like that. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going, because this is, of course, only half the paragraph. It's long. Yet at the last, Beren was slain by the wolf that came from the gates of Angband, and he died in the arms of Tinuvio. But she chose mortality, to die from the world, so that she might follow him. And it is sung that they met again beyond the sundering seas, and after a brief time, walking alive once more in the green woods, together they passed, long ago, beyond the confines of this world. So it is that Luthien Tinuvio, alone of the elf kindred, has died indeed, and left the world, and they have lost her whom they most loved. Okay, this is sounding more and more like a bit of a downer, Aragorn, right? This is his emphasis. They've lost her, whom they most loved. They passed away. Together they passed long ago, beyond the confines of this world. That's where he goes with the story. So it is that Luthien Tinuviel, alone of the elf kindred, has died indeed and left the world, and they lost her whom they most loved. But from her, the lineage of the elf lords of old descended among men. There live still those of whom Luthien was the foremother, and it is said that her line shall never fail. Elrond of Rivendell is of that kin. For of Beren and Luthien was born Diol Thingol's heir, and of him Elwing the White, whom Eärendil wedded, that he that sailed his ship out of the mists of the world into the seas of heaven with the Silmaril upon his brow, and of Eärendil came the kings of Númenor, that is, Westerness. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, so Mad Violinist, that is a really interesting thing, isn't it? What we come to, the heart of the story does seem to be the sacrifice of Tinuviel, right? I don't think of, I'm kind of teasing Aragorn about telling a sort of apparently discouraging story, but I don't think it's about discouragement, obviously, in the end, right? It's clearly about sacrifice. Tinuviel's sacrifice. Gilgonthir, exactly, because we see the fruit of her sacrifice. Her line shall never fail. That is a hopeful note, right? There is good fruit to her sacrifice. She chose mortality and to die from the world so that she might follow him. The beautiful reciprocity here, right, of... hang on a second, I have a feeling, yep, sorry. My apologies. The way in which Tolkien uses this mirroring, right? So we have him coming in and finding her and following her, and her turning to him, and now that turning, right, when she initially turns and sets her hand in his, is only an anticipation of the later moment, right, where he has come through the mountains of terror and through from death and through fear to her. She is going to cross the gulf of death itself to follow him after that, right? And of course we have him in the poem chasing her all over the place, right, seeking her and searching for her, and she of course is going to turn and search for him too. Yeah. Anyway, let's see. Where is... I see you guys talking about doom. I missed it. Does it use the word doom here? I mean, doom is obviously an important concept, and Beren's doom is important, but I might just be totally overlooking it, but I don't think it's used here. Which is important, if I'm right? That it's in the actual poem, I think so, yeah. But my point is, that's not his emphasis, right? He could have said, as indeed it is said in the Silmarillion, that a mighty doom is laid upon Beren, right? And this is why he is able to pass into Doria through the girdle of Melian in the first place. Notice that's not even alluded to in either place, either in the poem or in the prose, right? So, and that seems to me important, because that could be a way in which it could be an angle that Aragorn would choose to emphasize, right? He might say, a mighty doom was laid on him, and thus he was enabled to accomplish, his incredibly unlikely seeming quest, right? He had this impossible seeming quest, in his case, of course, designed to kill him, into darkness, to go into darkness, into the heart of the enemy's realm. But hey, it kind of panned out for him in the end, didn't it? Right? He could totally do that, right? He could totally turn the story that way. That would be a very applicable turn to this story for Frodo here. But he doesn't do that, right? He doesn't talk about Beren's doom. He doesn't exactly suggest that that parallel. Yeah, good. Valori says in the poem it's passive. Doom fell on Tenuviel. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, good. So there is that emphasis on the poem, but again, it's not Beren's doom. It's her doom, and it's the doom that she that falls upon her as a result of the spell, right, that he casts on her, but also as a result of her choice. Sure. Anyway, okay. But again, that's not, when he's telling the prose story, that's not what he emphasizes. What he emphasizes is the sorrow, the sadness. This is a sad story that he's telling. Beren and Luthien's story is a sad story. They struggle, they suffer. He's killed and dies in her arms. And then she loses more, she chooses mortality, which is great. But at the same time, he then emphasizes the sorrow of everybody else, right? And they lost her whom they most loved. So he seems to emphasize the very sadness of the story, not just for Beren and Luthien, but for the people around them, right? It seems to me that what's important about this story is not that it ends well despite the sadness. It's the sadness itself, which is an important element, I think, of this, right? Yeah, Mike says ask Dairon if it's a happy story. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the things that we find here that I think is really important, it's easy for us to, in trying to think of why Aragorn is telling this story, why Tolkien has chosen this story at this moment to lift up the hearts of the hobbits in the dell under Weathertop. I think that the important thing here is to notice that he doesn't tell a happy story. Now, you might say there aren't very many happy stories, but there are happy, at the very least, you could try to emphasize the happy elements, as indeed many of us have been doing in talking about it, right? I mean, you can spin this story in a happy way. It's a story about true love, right? Who doesn't like a good story about true love? It's a kissing book, right? So you tell a true love story, and there's this eucatastrophe at the beginning and at the end, right? My goodness, and they overcome darkness, and let's tell the Beren and Luthien's greatest hits about all the awesome things that they accomplished, and it's great, right? You could totally spin this as a happy story. Right. There are lots of happy elements to it, lots of hopeful elements to it that you could take from it. But that's not what he emphasizes, is, I think, the important thing there. Right. He doesn't emphasize the happy bits. He doesn't exactly shy away from them. But that's not how he tells the story. It's not how Aragorn tells the story, right? That's not what he emphasizes. First he tells the poem, right? He tells about the meeting. That's the essence, right? That's the most important thing. But in his synopsis, he talks about, when he puts it in context, the context is a context of sorrow, right? It is the sadness of this story in part that is really important. But although it's sad, although it involves much suffering and fear and pain and death, it's a good story nevertheless, right? Remember the primary sort of moment that's going to come from this, right? Who's going to remember this story best, of course, and that's Sam. And it's going to be this moment, it seems to me, that Sam is primarily reflecting back on in that conversation he's going to have with Frodo in the Stairs of Cirith Ungol, right? when he talks about happy ending or sad ending stories, and how you don't know whether it's going to be happy. You know, the people in the story don't know whether it's going to be happy ending or sad ending, right? And that a story can be good to hear, even if it wouldn't be one that would be good to be in, right? And that sometimes those stories, which don't sound like any fun to be in, are ones that are really good to hear, right? And are really important to hear. Yeah, good. Matt is just thinking about exactly the same thing. When he realizes, as Marianne was just saying, when Sam realizes that they're in the same tale, that I think is ultimately Sam getting exactly what Aragorn was thinking, possibly even more than Aragorn was thinking. I think that the moral that Sam has taken from this story, maybe even beyond what Aragorn was kind of going for when he told the story here in the first place. It is an important story for them to know. It's just here, this is how the world works. And it's how the world works in all these different... Eucatastrophe happens. There is reason for hope. There is light and beauty that the shadow cannot touch, right? And cannot destroy. But there's also sorrow. There's also pain. There is death and long separation. There is a price of sacrifice, a real price. Luthien sacrificed herself to be with Beren, and that was beautiful. It's the final eucatastrophe of the Beren and Luthien story, right? Off they go together singing Sorrowless, right? And yet there's a real cost to it. And they have lost her whom they most loved. So that's ultimately what they get. In a sense, they get an extremely sort of well-rounded story, right? It is not merely an encouraging story. Again, very encouraging elements in it. And some of those get emphasized to some extent, putting Sauron in his place in the big picture, right? Talking about the overthrowing of the great enemy who was Sauron's boss, and all these things. But they are learning through this story. They are learning about this is how the world works, right? This is what happens, and that even when there is loss and death and suffering, right? Even when it looks like your story is failing, as it kind of might have done, right? Yet at last Beren was slain by the wolf that came from the gates of Angband and died in the arms of Tinuviel. Seriously? That's how their story ends? They go through all of this in order to achieve her bride price, right? From the crown of Morgoth, and then, like, right afterwards, he dies in her arms? Seriously? That's the end of the story? Well, no, of course it's not the end of the story. And we get a eucatastrophe that comes after that. The eucatastrophe of sacrifice. But, of course, it comes at a cost. Valori, exactly. It comes at a cost to Tinuviel. To Thingol, rather. Right? And through Thingol, kind of by extension, everybody else, right? All of the other elves. So... I mean, again, all of that stuff is there. And again, the encouragement that they're given is not just, hey, look at the bright side. Hey, like, know that, there's somebody in your corner. Know that, the good guys are going to win in the end, right? That's not the kind of encouragement that they're given. And the very sadness of the story is itself part of its beauty. And through its beauty, therefore, its power, right? This is a glimpse of how things are supposed to be, if you see what I mean. Maybe it is, Lady Schmebuak, the sort of partly the memory of this story that gives Sam the hope that he experiences when he sees the star. Yeah. Exactly, Matt. No quick victory and home by Christmas. No let's pop off to Rivendell and then come back home again, like Merry and Pippin sang about in their original song in Crick Hollow, right? Yeah, no, it's just, that's not how things are. And Zeph and I agree with you. I think that a hey, look on the bright side of things story would not have much power over the hearts at this moment. Would that be able to combat the fear that is right now being positively emitted by the ringwraiths, right? I don't think so. Think happy thoughts is not the way to fight the ringwraiths in the darkness when you're alone in the wilderness, right? That, I think, is not really the method. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to the poem. Here's the original poem, and then we're gonna look at this because I think it's really interesting to see. The primary thing I want to get out of this, there's much more that we could talk about and look at, thinking about this in its earlier context, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But what I primarily want to do, one of the things that is always for me most fun about looking at an earlier version of a poem like this, is we can see the direction that Tolkien changed it, right? In what direction did he push it when he revised it? Because we'll notice some interesting differences, right? What patterns can we see in the differences between this poem and the later poem, the poem that we already read? Because that will help us to see what is he emphasizing, right? When he reworks this poem in its new context, right? In its new context in the Fellowship of the Ring, what does he choose to emphasize and how does he change it? And that should help draw our attention to some of the things happening in the published poem that we looked at last time that maybe we didn't think about in the same way. So, okay, so here's the original. You'll see it has a very similar shape. The grass was very long and thin, the leaves of many years lay thick, the old tree roots wound out and in, and the early moon was glimmering. There went her white feet lilting quick, and Dairon's flute did bubble thin, as neath the hemlock umbels thick, Tinuviel danced a shimmering. Okay, so notice we've got the same shape, right? You've got those C rhymes, glimmering and shimmering, same words, right? Notice we've got the ABA, BAB rhyme scheme form. Notice also that the repetition of words is much firmer from the beginning. Notice thin, thick is repeated in exactly that order at the beginning. So that repetition of words in the A and B rhyme is prominent, and you'll see that's unvarying throughout this poem. I think it's unvarying. Maybe it varies and I've forgotten, but as you can see, it's very prominent. We can already peek ahead, right, and see noiselessly leaves in the next stanza there as well. What else do you notice immediately about this? Karita says it feels less like singing and more like a news story, more news story. Yeah, there's certainly less of that firsthand experience. Notice how, remember when I was talking about how we're sort of invited, like ourselves, to be peeking through the leaves and seeing first something shimmering in the darkness, and then it turns out to be the starlight shimmering on her hair, right? It's not like that. It's told from a much more sort of objective third-person point of view, right? We get the three different lines now about the old forest, right? And the early moon was glimmering. Karita, as you say, we're just kind of describing the scene, right? And then there she is, her white feet lilting quick. So here she is dancing, and we got the pipers mentioned, right? Dairon is named. It's his flute that's bubbling along. And there she's dancing beneath the hemlock umbels, right? Okay, no problem. So yes, JJ, we did cut the flute player. Like Dairon is, so he was there, right? I mean, somebody was playing, and it was presumably him, but we didn't. We never even got introduced to him in the new poem. And yes, she is already named here. Mike, Tinuviel danced a shimmering. That's very important, right? This is already her name, right? The pale moths lumbered noiselessly, and daylight died among the leaves, as Beren from the wild country came thither wayworn sorrowing. He peered between the hemlock sheaves, and watched in wonder noiselessly her dancing through the moonlit leaves, and the ghostly moths a-following. I love how the moths. I love the moths too, Karita. I love how we've got the pale moths lumbering. Lumbering is a wonderful verb for moths, right? The noiseless lumbering of the moths through the air, and then as daylight dies, and she is there dancing in the moonlight, the moths are following her, right? As of course is Beren's gaze, and soon to be Beren himself, right? Yes, but it's very rigidly third person, isn't it, Matt? It gives you that very sort of we're very much kind of looking down on all this stuff happening. There's Tinuviel dancing. There's Beren coming in to follow her. Their magic took his weary feet, and he forgot his loneliness, and out he danced, unheeding, fleet, where the moonbeams were a-glistening. Through the tangled woods of Elfiness they fled on nimble fairy feet, and left him to his loneliness in the silent forest listening. Still hearkening for the imagined sound of lissom feet upon the leaves, for music welling underground in the dim-lit caves of Doriath, but withered are the hemlock sheaves, and one by one with mournful sound whispering fall the beechen leaves in the dying woods of Doriath. Okay. Yeah. Once again, you see the repetition of the nouns. Note, the rhyming words, right? Feet, loneliness. Feet, loneliness. Notice how that gets reversed again. So we see a similar motion that we did in the other poem. His weary feet is being rhymed with nimble fairy feet. Right. So we see the reversal there. But notice how that reversal is just a contrast. Right. His magic is taking his weary feet, and he's forgetting his loneliness, and his feet are becoming fleet, right? He comes dancing out with her. He is enchanted, and we see the enchantment working on him. But the rhyme word, the repeated word, introduces really primarily just a contrast, right, between his weary, clumpy mortal feet and their nimble fairy feet. And notice it's them, right? The two of them. Again, it's Luthien and Dairon who are fleeing away. So again, it's much less that repetition with his. Remember the roaming and the wandering, right? That was coming back. That was being done so poignantly in that stanza. Still hearkening for the imagined sound. Oh, I already did that one. Notice how Doriath is the rhyming term, right? We don't get any non-ing words as the C rhyme until the very last stanza of the newer poem, right? But in the old poem here in stanza 4, we have Doriath being used as a repeated word, multisyllabic rhyme in the C position, right? So which is also, it kind of works, right? It kind of works because the movement, right, the glistening, listening, glimmering, shimmering has ceased, right, and he's waiting, he's hearkening, listening for the imagined sound of lissom feet upon the leaves. The only movement in that whole stanza are the beechen leaves falling in the dying woods of Doriath, right? Notice, of course, also the very fact that Doriath and Dairon, the proper nouns, are being used here in the poem, places the story in a more kind of historical context than we were getting with the new poem. The new poem was more distant from all that. He had to explain it all in prose because you wouldn't have gotten their story at all. The rest of their story, the context of their story, from the poem itself, right? The poem itself was totally uninterested in that. He sought her wandering near and far, where the leaves of one more year were strewn by winter moon and frosty star with shaken light a-shivering. He found her 'neath a misty moon, a silver wraith that danced afar, and the mists beneath her feet were strewn in moonlight palely quivering. She danced upon a hillock green, whose grass unfading kissed her feet, while Dairon's fingers played unseen, or his magic flute a-flickering. And out he danced, unheeding, fleet, in the moonlight to the hillock green. No impress found he of her feet, that fled him swiftly flickering. So here she runs away again. The story of their meeting gets sort of protracted a little bit here. He sees her dancing. We get the grass, though. Notice what we don't get emphasized here, right? We don't get an emphasis on the spring, right? We had that winter image, with the beach and leaves and everything, but we don't get, her song calling forth the southern spring, or any of that. We get the references to the grass, right? So we can kind of figure out that spring was happening, but we don't, that's not what it primarily emphasizes. No impress found he of her feet, I really like. And Karita, it is kind of fun to have Luthien described as a wraith, right? Yeah, that is, especially, of course, in this context, interesting. She is a silver wraith that danced afar. Yeah, Finnboga, if he had still called her a wraith in the Fellowship, he'd have had to interrupt himself and said not to say such things. Was clearly less freighted at this time, as certainly as, this was way, 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 way before the invention of the ring wraiths. And longing filled his voice that called, Tinuviel, Tinuviel, and longing sped his feet enthralled behind her wayward shimmering. She heard as echo of a spell his lonely voice that longing called, Tinuviel, Tinuviel. One moment paused she glimmering. I love that line. One moment paused she glimmering. She hears his voice calling us. She's running away again. She's in full retreat, right? And she hears him calling from a distance as an echo of a spell, right? Behind her, wayward shimmering, is him, right? His feet are enthralled, right? He can't help himself. He's enchanted, right? And he's running after her and calling out to her. And she pauses when his spell falls upon her, as her spell has very thoroughly been laid upon him. And Beren caught that elfin maid and kissed her trembling starlit eyes, Tinuviel, whom love delayed in the woods of evening morrowless. Till moonlight and till music dies, shall Beren by the elfin maid dance in the starlight of her eyes, in the forest singing sorrowless. Okay, so notice this is a little more proactive on Beren's side, right? It is still mutual in the sense that love has delayed her, right? She paused, and she paused because she was listening. She was by love delayed, right? And that's why he caught her, right? But it is the story, Mad Violinist, exactly. Well, it's a story of a fairy capture of a mortal, but it's also of a mortal capturing a fairy, right? I mean, this is one of the ironies that this story is still working with, this poem is still working with, is this idea, right, of an enthralled mortal chasing desperately and hopelessly, ultimately, after a fairy princess dancing in the forest whom he will never possibly catch, right? And he does, right? I mean, this is like a story of someone who actually gets to the other end of the rainbow, right? I mean, it's this remarkable thing. Well, but Mad Violinist, I'm not sure I agree. It is mutual in this. Yes, he's caught and dances forever. In a sense, that is like exactly what can happen sometimes in a very punitive way, right, by mortals who are caught by fairies. But she is also caught by him, right? So we do have this sort of myth of a mutual capture, right? But Mad Violinist, I absolutely agree with you. This is a much more traditional telling. The kind of traditional fairy story that underlies this encounter, the whole Beren and Luthien story, is much closer to the surface, isn't it? You can feel it much closer there. It's like a variant of a traditional story, right? It's still a remarkable and new catastrophic variant, right? That they are in the forest singing sorrowless. But yeah, singing fox, it is interesting, isn't it? The story is finished with the end of the poem. Till moonlight and till music dies, shall Beren by the elfin maid dance in the starlight of her eyes, in the forest singing sorrowless. Are they going to have any further story? They moving on? Fighting Melkor? Him dying? Her going beyond death? No hint of it. It says this is the end of their story here, right? So, all right. Let me explain a little bit of the context here. Tolkien published this poem in a magazine. It is my belief that Tolkien wrote this poem independently. That is, I suspect that this poem, when he first wrote it, was not a Beren and Luthien poem at all. I think this was a mortal elf poem. This was a poem about a mortal who met an elf in the woods. And this was how it ended. It doesn't mention any other story because there wasn't any other story. And it ends, Mad Violinist, exactly as you're saying, exactly as so many of these mortal stories do. When you might get a happy ending. It's happened before, right? In fairy stories, when you meet with a fairy queen in the forest, sometimes, if you are exceptionally lucky, that has a happy ending. That totally is precedented, right? But it's, you never just come back to the normal world, right? If it does have a happy ending, it almost always ends with, like, it's a one-way trip, right? You go and you are taken into fairy and you live there forever. If you're super lucky, happily ever after. If not, in, like, stasis or eternal torment, right? It's it can kind of go one way or another. But this whole till moonlight and till music dies, shall Beren by the elfin maid dance in the starlight of her eyes, in the forest singing sorrowless, right? Until the end of time, until there is no more music, right? They're in this sort of static place, right? Several of you are asking about the association with himself and his wife. Tricky. If I had to guess, I would guess that this poem, Light as Leaf on Linden Tree. So, now keep in mind, I'm piling guess upon guess here. Okay, so guess number one. I believe that this was written prior to the Beren and Luthien connection. I don't think this was written for Beren and Luthien. I think it was written as a fairy story, sort of an objective fairy story with unnamed characters. And then I would guess, on top of that guess, I would then also guess that he was thinking of Edith. Yes. I suspect that came first in this story. We know that the incident that he talks about of her dancing among the hemlock umbels, Edith, his wife, was early, right? Well before the publication of this poem or its insertion into the Silmarillion world. So yeah, I definitely think that's part of it. Well, right now it's Harnath. It's not about like whether or not it's the association between him and Beren and Luthien is, him and Edith and Beren and Luthien is very, very well established, right? It's literally carved in the stone, Harnath, of course, as you point out on their tombstone. But my point is about this poem before it became a Beren and Luthien poem, right? So, okay. Because here's the interesting thing. The story of Beren and Tinuviel, Luthien is a much later name. Her original name was Tinuviel. The story of Beren and Tinuviel is in the Book of Lost Tales. Book of Lost Tales, go to the Book of Lost Tales Volume 2 and read the tale of Tinuviel, and you'll get the original story of Beren and Tinuviel. What you will notice when you read this is that Beren is not mortal. He's not a man. He's a Noldor. He's Noldo and she's Sindar. So it's still a like Romeo and Juliet kind of situation, right? Their two houses don't really get along super well, but it is not a mortal in fairy story at all. The Beren and Luthien story. I think my own theory is that it is this poem that led to Beren and Luthien Beren's becoming a man, ceasing to be an elf and becoming a man. I think he wrote this poem separately, possibly thinking about Edith. Probably thinking about Edith. And then he decided this is a Beren and Luthien poem, in fact. And then that's when he adds the names into the poem. And after doing this, so first he writes the Beren and Luthien story, Beren and Tinuviel story, I should say, in the Book of Lost Tales, right, in which Beren is an elf all the way through. And then he revises this poem to make it a Beren and Luthien story, realizing that, like, this poem, this is it, right? This is the heart of the Beren and Luthien story. That needs to be worked back into it, right? And then this becomes then the Beren and Luthien story. Now, here's the interesting thing. When this came up, this poem, this version of the poem that I've just given you, you know where it came from? This comes from the Lays of Beleriand. So it comes from the Lays of Beleriand. It does not come from the Lay of Luthien. So Tolkien writes the Book of Lost Tales first, right? Almost writes it. Doesn't finish it, right? But he's working on the Book of Lost Tales. This is the first version of the Silmarillion story. And then he sets those aside and he focuses on some of the great tales. And he's like, okay, what I need is I need to write epic poems, right, about some of these great stories. So what does he start with? What story does he begin with? Turin Turambar, of course, right? Turin was always first. Turin is always first. The story of Turin is one of the very first things he ever wrote. So he's going to write an alliterative epic poem of the children of Hurin. So we get the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin. And he's writing this in like 1918, 1919, right? Way back. He starts writing this poem and he writes quite a bit of it. He gets in the Turin Turambar story all the way up to, I was about to say Gondolin, Nargothrond. All the way up to Nargothrond. Okay? So it gets up to Nargothrond in the Turin Turambar story. And then he kind of does his thing that he so often does, right? He goes away from it for a while and comes back to it. Instead of picking up where he left off, he's like, I need to start it again from the beginning, right? So he starts it again from the beginning. Classic Tolkien maneuver, right? Starts the poem again from the beginning and starts writing a second version of the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin. But as he's doing so, something really interesting happens. At a certain point in the story of Beren and Luthien just keeps bubbling up through the story of Turin Turambar. And he includes a reference to the story of Beren and Tinuvio. Like, he just alludes to the story. And soon after, he has somebody mention the story. And when they mention it, they start telling, it just starts it starts coming in more detail. And then, wham! He inserts this poem into the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin. Which is striking, because this poem is not alliterative at all. It's a totally different style. And so he inserts it like an inserted poem within prose, except it's an inserted poem within a different poem, right? So, like, we interrupt this alliterative lay to give you light as leaf on linden tree. And then we resume the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin, right? After more discussion of Beren and Luthien. Soon after this, he stops writing the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin and starts writing the lay of Luthien, starts writing a full-length epic poem about Beren and Luthien, right? It's almost like the Beren and Luthien story was just like hatching out of the egg at this point. I mean, again, it had been born already, it had been written, but it needs to be redone, right? It's fully cooked now, right? And it really needs to come out. It really needs to be told. So he shifts and he abandons the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin, and he starts writing the lay of Luthien, the story of Beren and Luthien. Now, guess at what moment the Beren and Luthien story comes out, and he inserts this poem into the alliterative lay of the children of Hurin. So, okay, cast back in your mind to the story of Turin Turambar. I know that's a painful place to revisit, but revisit it near the beginning of the story, at least as it's told in the published Silmarillion. So you'll remember that everybody dies at the near ninth Arnoediad, right? And here is Morwen, left, Turin's mom, right, left a widow, and Turin alone, because his sister's not born yet, younger sister, older sister's already dead. And so she's going to send him away, right, to keep him safe, because she's worried about his safety. So she's going to send him to Doriath in order to be fostered by King Thingol, right? Remember that? But it was a long journey from Hithlum, where they were, all the way down to Doriath, where Thingol is. And in the alliterative lay, he is given two human companions, who are, trusty members of Morwen's household, who are given charge of Turin to bring him down to Doriath, right? But there comes a time. Well, so let's look at it. Here's the context. Oh, look at me. Oh my goodness, I forgot the last stanza. Holy cow. How could I forget about that? Wherever grass is long and thin, and the leaves of countless years lie thick, and ancient roots wind out and in, as once they did in Doriath, shall go their white feet lilting quick, but never Dairon's music thin be heard beneath the hemlocks thick, since Beren came to Doriath. Oh man, I can't believe I forgot the last stanza. That's terrible. Here I got sloppy because of course we got to sit in the forest singing Sorrowless, and I'm like, the end, right? But of course it's not the end in the original. We kind of pan back. That's the end of their story, right? But we kind of pan back to the outside world, right? And wherever grass is long and thin and the leaves of countless years lie thick. So we have like the memory of the forest from the beginning where Tinuvio was singing, right? And like wherever you can find forests as once growing like this, as once they did in Doriath, shall go their white feet lilting quick. So again, we have this sort of infinite continuation of their story, right? But it ends on a note of sorrow. But never Dairon's music thin be heard beneath the hemlocks thick, since Beren came to Doriath. Dairon's out of there, right? Dairon is the third wheel in this situation, and he is never heard from again since Beren came to Doriath. So even in this version of the story, there's still a cost even though Beren and Tenuvia live happily ever after in this version of the story, we do still get that note of sorrow, and the repetition of Doriath as the sea rhyme. Whew. Okay. Likely a bot. That's a good name. Says, like Edith's fiance going away. Yeah, kind of like that. It's kind of hard to deny that parallel, isn't it? For those of you who don't know, so Tolkien met Edith, and, they were like, attached, but his guardian said, no, you can't, like, don't see her again until you're 21. And he was like, okay, fine. And so he did. And then he comes back. It's like on his 21st birthday, he like goes to propose and finds she's already engaged to somebody else. Oh, snap. But they have a heart-to-heart talk, and he talks her out of it, and she marries him instead. So yeah, there is a certain parallel there, isn't it, with poor Daeron. Yeah, so anyway, but back to what I was going to say before. I can't believe I forgot the last stanza of the poem. That is so horrible and sloppy. Here is the alliterative lay immediately before and after this poem. Then a song he made for them, for sorrow's lightning. Because, see, they're in a forest, and it's very dark, and it's very scary. And they're a long way from home, and they don't know that they're going to be able to achieve their journey, and they don't know what's going to happen to them, and Turin is afraid, right? Then a song he made for them, for sorrow's lightning, a sudden sweetness in the silent wood, that is light as leaf on linden called, whose music of mirth and mourning blended, yet in hearts does echo. Thus did Helog sing them. Helog is, of course, one of the two guys who's with him. And then we get the poem in a totally different meter, of course. And then right after the poem, he transitions back by saying, this for hearts uplifting did Helog sing them, as the frowning fortress of the forest clasped them, and nethermost night in its net caught them. There Turin and the twain knew torture of thirst, and hunger and fear, and hideous flight from wolf riders and wandering orcs and the things of Morgoth that thronged the woods. Okay, so they are in a frowning fortress of the forest. This song is sung for hearts uplifting, right? It's exactly the same context. They are surrounded by, they are about to be pursued in hideous flight from wolf riders and wandering orcs and things of Morgoth, right? That throng the woods. The enemies are closing in. They're in darkness and fear. So we get the poem. We get Light as Leaf on Linden Tree for the first time, sung by Helog, for hearts uplifting. And what is it that uplifts their hearts? Music of mirth and mourning blended, yet in hearts does echo. A song he made them for sorrow's lightning, a sudden sweetness in the silent wood, that is light as leaf on linden called, whose music of mirth and mourning blended, yet in hearts does echo. Certainly true. It is certainly true that the music of mirth and mourning does yet in hearts echo, right? It's still echoing in the hearts of Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin in the Fellowship of the Ring. The same poem, now revised in the same context, right? Yeah, Trifle, exactly. Turin has just departed from Morwen, has just separated from Morwen, has just experienced one of the sorrows of his life. And he does cry out for this. Yeah, Trifle's quoting this. She's got her copy of Lays of Beleriand out. The hills are hateful where hope is lost. O Morwen, my mother, I am meshed in tears, for grim are the hills and my home is gone. She says, I feel like Frodo could relate to this. Yeah, quite likely so. Being sent off into exile, right? Going there, but not back again, as far as you can see. Yeah, we can see the parallel with Frodo's situation here, and how the music of mirth and mourning might affect him, right? And Mad Violinist, as you were saying a long time before, the essential story of not of their triumph over darkness, but of Luthien's sacrifice, even though it was a costly sacrifice for others, right? Luthien's sacrifice, that is the kind of core inspiration for Frodo, right? It is in that sense, you could say, that as Sam intuits later on, right? They're in the same story. Their story is the same story as the story of Beren and Luthien. They are not just because Frodo and Sam are fighting the darkness together, and it's not just the sort of superficial parallels of the two of them together going into the center of the Dark One's realm and casting him down from his throne and all that. It's not that, right? Ultimately, it is Frodo's sacrifice, which is going to be parallel both to Beren's sacrifice, but also to Luthien's, right? He's going to be like Beren, losing a finger instead of a hand, right? But also he's going to be like Luthien, and they will lose him whom they loved, right? As he leaves the Shire, which Sam was hoping that he was going to enjoy for years and years yet, right? So the point that I'm making here is that it is no accident that Strider sings this song here, right? It is no accident that it's not a new concept that Tolkien would associate this song with hearts uplifting, right? At a moment of darkness and fear and doubt and uncertainty, with the servants of the enemy closing in. That is the original application. It's not the source of the poem, right? As I said, the poem has its source before that, and the story of Beren and Tinuvio predates it in one version. So again, it's not like the story is invented at this point, but it is first applied in a moment that is exactly like this, right? The Beren and Luthien story is designed to be sung at a moment like this. So there is, I think, a lot that we can learn about the blending of mirth and mourning by looking at this song and the way in which it is not randomly, not arbitrarily, not sort of fleetingly applied to this kind of moment. This is the best possible kind of story to tell in this sort of moment. And the power of the music of mirth and mourning being blended in it will still echo in hearts, right? Ages and ages later. Okay, anyway, I have done something today that I have not done in more than a year. Easily more than a year. I have finished all my slides. Oh, look at that. I got through everything I planned to get through today, and it's still time to do our field trip as normal. Exactly on time. How about that, right? That never happens. So next week, I'm gonna sign off Twitter here because we're gonna go and do our field trip. So we're going to do our field trip next week. Of course, we will resume after Strider stops telling his story and what happens immediately after that. So we're gonna. I don't know if we'll finish the chapter next week. That seems a little rash. But I bet we've got 2 weeks at most left in this chapter. That seems totally fair. Anyway. Thank you for going back on our little historical look here over the sort of the ancient history of Beren and Luthien and how it applies here and helps us to understand, I think, to some extent, the importance of this moment in the story. And of course, you'll remember a thing that I forgot to say. Remember that most important sentence Tolkien ever wrote, as I was arguing, right? When Strider first says, "I will tell you the tale of Tinuviel." It is the moment when the story of Beren and Luthien bubbles up into the Lord of the Rings as well. That's the moment when everything comes together, when the world of the Silmarillion legends and the world of this Hobbit sequel come together and become merged into one big story. That Tolkien's story, world, and therefore his entire creative life is transformed. And it's as always, it's always about the story of Beren and Luthien. Story of Turin Turambar is always where he starts, but the story of Beren and Luthien is always the one that comes in and is such a huge and transformative influence on him. So, all right, thanks everybody. So we're going to do our field trip now, and I'm going to sign off on Twitter. Thanks for joining us. All right, there we go.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So yeah, so I started reading the poem and then explaining the poem. I mean, that's literally what I've been doing with my daughter too, because I'll read her the poem and then I'll finish and she'll just kind of look at me and then she'll go, "Okay, what's the TLDR on this?" Yeah. So
yeah,
for those who don't know, that's abbreviation for too long, didn't read.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say that the Aragorn's prose afterwards, I mean, as one of the listeners was saying, it's awful dense. I mean, that big fat paragraph stuffed full of names is so skippable, especially for a young reader.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, and I think I ended up, turning off the Kindle at this point and having a long discussion about Beren and Luthien at the time.
Yeah.
She's still mad there's not like a big illustrated Silmarillion that's made in much plainer language, like, the Dolores Greek Myths books or something like that.
Right, yeah.
Maybe someday.
All right. We're going to head back to the Lone Lands.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do that. Okay, so we're going to go back to the Lone Lands. We have been... So last time, I'm about to say last week, but of course we didn't do it last week. Last time we did our field trip, I found my hypothesis that I formed on top of Weathertop completely justified in extremely satisfying ways. When I was suspecting from the look of the lay of the land and the positioning of the ruins that we were looking at the road, the east-west road, as the frontier between the frontier between the Rudauran and the Arthedainian ruins. And it's interesting because, of course, we don't have that level of detail about where things were. I mean, we know that Emon Sul was sort of at the frontier. We know that there was a battle there, of course. We know generally where Rudaur was, and where the boundaries were. But anyway, the idea that they would kind of march, especially the way that they have the terrain set up there in the Lone Lands, with the road kind of going through the middle and higher ground both to the north and the south of it.
Yeah. Oh, is everyone ahead? By the way, we got some tremendous lag going on right now.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to work through that here.
Yeah. Let's meet at the gate out there. See if.
Yeah. Trying to make it out of Breetown.
Yeah.
Whew.
Harvest Festival's over, guys.
Okay.
Are the people? Okay.
Still lagging. Okay. Whew.
Yeah.
All right.
Ooh, let me turn my graphics down. Whoa, Woodsman Gate nearly finished me there.
All right.
It's like real life. I pass through a doorway and then I suddenly forget where I am and what I'm doing there. You know?
Right, exactly. All right. Okay, let's head out towards the Lone Lands.
All right.
All right. Sorry, I'm now thinking about that concept of the child Silmarillion.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, because I have to sit down and I have to do the simple version, you know?
Yeah.
But she loved the story of Beren and Luthien, what I could remember without pulling out the book, and she loved the fact that, you know, in that version, unlike the early poem, it's all Luthien doing all the heroic stuff.
Yes.
So she's definitely a damsel for today. I think we need more Luthien's stories and songs and cinema.
Yeah. Well, and of course I know it's one of the frustrations that so many Tolkien fans have had, you know, when people who have only read The Lord of the Rings, or worse still, only read The Hobbit, complain about Tolkien and strong women characters. And, and, you know, I mean, how many times has this debate happened, right? You know, but Luthien.
Usually we can shut him down with Eowyn, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, just the sheer number of female characters in those books. It does. Yeah.
It's different.
They have.
It's
different.
Yeah.
Of course, Silmarillion is just, you know, elves behaving badly the whole time. So.
Yeah. And I don't think. See, the hard thing is, I feel like if you were to do it right.
We're making me do it now. Okay.
If you were to do it right,
all right,
you would have to do it. You would have to do it within a frame. So I think the model, we have a model for what the child Silmarillion would be like.
Yeah,
right?
I think Dolores' Greek myths and Norse myths, I think, are some of the finest
true.
books for kids about mythology.
I agree. I think that, I'm a big fan of those books too. But we have a model within Tolkien.
That's true.
We have a model within Tolkien, which is the Gilgalad poem that we were just reading a few weeks back, right? That is, I think that's pretty clearly a child's version of the Silmarillion story that Bilbo wrote for Hobbit children, like Sam.
Yep.
When he was,
I don't know if I could make the whole thing in rhyme, but yes.
Yeah, well, see, that's a problem. I think that would be the best way to do it. But even if we did it in prose, you know, we do have, I mean, and that's something I'd never really thought about that poem that way until we discussed it, you know, a month ago.
Yeah.
Oops, boy. It's like every time I go past this guy, I introduce myself to him.
What do you need?
Okay.
It's a different server every time, man.
Different server every time. Different pip every time.
I get that too.
Anyway, so but yeah, I think it is really kind of fun to think about the fact that it kind of is a thing, right? I mean, Bilbo was working on it, but what I would love to see is to see this done within that kind of frame, right? Because you got to think this would be like one of the things that Bilbo would have done, right?
Yeah, it'd be fun to get like artwork that looks like Tolkien's sort of Father Christmas paintings too.
Yes, exactly. Sort of model on the Father Christmas letters, and yeah.
All right, you do the pitch. I'll give you some sample stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure we can sell Christopher on this. That shouldn't be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I know he's not in charge anymore, but come on.
Yeah. Amazon would probably like. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, what we do is we put up fan art and then wait for people to approach us. So.
Yeah, it's not really practical.
No, it's not
I
practical,
mean, I
and
guess
in many cases.
if we just made it online and didn't sell it, it would technically be fan fiction, right? And so therefore protected.
Okay, so first we have to do is we have to wait for an 8th day of the week to be invented so I can sleep, and then I will have the time and energy to do this.
Yeah. Let's make this happen, people. Let's make
All
this
right,
happen.
yeah. Petition your government for an 8-day calendar.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we have just passed under Weathertop. There's weather. Ooh, the moon right on top of Weathertop. This is a cool angle.
Yeah, it almost looks like
we
the
can
eye
watch the
itself.
moon sinking down into Weathertop. That's more than a little bit
Oh,
awesome,
man.
actually.
All the ring race can see us under this light.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, anyway, okay. So now coming back, considering the landscape here. So here is the valley we were looking down on from Weathertop in the daylight, right? And we could see there are the ruins there on the south side, and here are the ruins here on the north side. And I was theorizing, rather, that these ones in the north were probably Rudauran and the ones in the south were probably Arthurdanian, and we found that to be triumphantly vindicated.
Multiple evidence to support this.
Right, in the first case, and so we were going to continue down to the next set and see how that went on. Let's see how it goes on, as Puddleglum would say. In one of my favorite passages in the whole silver chair. There's something nasty at the bottom, I shouldn't wonder.
Sam sort of has that kind of voice all the time.
Yeah.
Well, you betcha there's some nasty critters at the bottom there, Mr. Frodo.
There's a little ruin up on the hilltop over here.
Oh, yeah, this is where the spiders live.
Finnboga, it did look like the Man in the Moon was parking on Weathertop. You're absolutely right.
Double parking, probably.
Yeah.
Spiders.
Yeah, so we got the spider region.
Yeah, I remember when we took our first tour up there. I think we still have that. I still have that group photo we took somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Now looking for what should be a Rudauran ruin.
Not much here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you called it.
It certainly is. Lovely. And this is, of course, a nice little keep up here and a nicely defensible location.
Yeah.
The evidence of the remains of what looks like a big sort of curtain wall down here, and then this little sort of gallery inside it, right?
Yep. This looks less like a leisure palace than the other Rudauran.
Yes, exactly. Big old Rudauran symbol there. Another one down there. All of this is Rudauran.
So is the theory here that the bridge at one point actually went over to Oscaroth then? It looks like from here it's the same architecture.
Yes, it does look like that. The pillars down there suggest that this continued. This is weird, though.
Yeah.
I mean, from a purely tactical standpoint, this is a little bit weird because if you have this nicely defensible fortress up on this really lovely shoulder of hill, which is a great place for a little fortress, why would you build a big wonking stone bridge up onto it from the other side?
Siege engines? Supplies?
Well, no, I'm not saying like a bridge is a bad idea, but a stone bridge is not a good idea. Like ask Turin Turambar about
Obviously,
that, right?
since it didn't last.
Well, I mean, okay, yes, it collapsed eventually, but you can't
We don't know
tear
if
down a stone bridge.
It might have collapsed the week after. Might have collapsed the week after they built it. Never know.
Well, that's certainly true, but still, the idea was to build a big stone bridge, which was a bad idea, even if they never executed it. Which it looks like they probably did.
Do we know if those are like interior-looking stones, or is that dirt down there?
That looks like, well, cobwebs mostly, but I think that looks like dirt down there.
Well, and this might have been like some sort of interior colonnade. All this rock and dirt over here. This might have been after like a rock slide or something like that, buried everything.
Right, but thinking about where this bridge was originally intended to go,
Yeah.
it kind of looks like it must have been intended to head over in the general
Yeah.
Oscaruthian direction, right?
Or most likely to keep an eye on the Arthedanian stuff across the way.
Right. There don't seem to be any fortifications. Well, anyway, I'm saying from a purely fortification standpoint, this bridge seems like.
Oh yeah, no, this is rubbish unless you have a trap of leading people underneath you or you're overseeing something.
Yeah.
Water, maybe?
Could it have been?
Maybe there was some sort of.
Could this have been like a waterfall or something? Doesn't look like any. I don't see any evidence of a waterfall, but it's possible.
Well, I know we're next to swampland.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't always swampland, and maybe there was actually. I mean, it has been implied heavily. There used to be a lot more water sources around here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I could believe that.
Because then it would make sense to have a bridge.
Yes, a wooden bridge, but yes, it would.
Yes.
It would.
We've seen a couple of examples of Rudar being more overly about presentation than sensibility.
True. Definitely.
He was the one who'd always not as paranoid as like the moonstruck Arthedanians on the other side, but
yes.
But certainly, this will show how powerful I am without actually making any sense.
Yeah, certainly we were seeing that in the last one, right? The one with the half orcs in it, whose name I'm forgetting already. But no, that makes sense. And there's no further ruins up here, right? Just like where up this cleft where the spiders are.
Oh no, there is something up there. Looks like a tower.
Look at that.
I don't.
A tower.
Don't know if we can get to it.
Probably a lookout tower. Big spiders. No, we can't get to it.
Boo.
Oh, that's disappointing. Because looking at the map, I'm guessing this would be a like counter weathertop high point.
Yeah,
lookout
definitely.
Spot, right?
And we keep seeing that. We keep seeing the lookout towers to look at the lookout towers out here.
Yeah, which again shows you that you have an uneasy frontier, right, between two increasingly hostile as the years go by nations.
It also promotes communication via signal.
Right. Okay, see there's weathertop over there, and as I believe, just sort of moving out around here for a second. Oh, a cliff.
That's a cliff.
Almost jumped off.
Yeah, that's a cliff. Yep.
So if we could just see, looking at it from here, that watchtower that we were just looking at right there would have been higher, or at least as high as the high points of that other fortress over there.
Look at the types of debris that had fallen. We've had like whole walls and staircases falling down over there. Something was not built properly or met a terrible end.
Shoddy building practices of the Rudarans, clearly.
Burnt down, fell over, then sank into the swamp.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, I want to go, before we head over to Oscaruth, which I am now very confident must be a Rudaran fortress, because it's clearly part of this whole thing. I want to head across the street. Is this a cliff?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. There's some cool little gazebo around here, though. I think that's further up, though.
Okay. All right, so I want to look at this fortress across the street here, because this is the last one. This is the fortress furthest to the east on the south side of the road. This one. And I am now, without even looking, I am now supremely confident that Oscaruth will have been a Rudaran stronghold. This one is the last question. So the question is, did Arthedain extend this far? And can we see where its boundary was? Yeah, this looks like Arthedain. I don't see the Rudaran crown.
It's that brown stone too, instead of the
Yeah, instead of that
blue
greenish
stone.
stone that we see, that sort of darker.
Mirroring Angmar stone.
Yes. Yep. Just stars.
Yep.
Just stars and scepters.
I got these dumb walkways over here too, though.
Oh, on the
Yeah,
underside.
this is like,
Yeah.
oh man. Yeah.
Yep. So this was definitely Arthedanian as well.
Yeah.
And this one is, yeah, I agree. Okay, well, so we've got this wall over here, which is clearly fallen down. So it wasn't nearly so easy to approach this interior court as. Well, this is all kind of interesting, as they've built all of it up like you can't get to, like nothing is on the ground floor, right? You've got to get upstairs to get everywhere.
Yeah, it makes me think there was water here, because
that's actually really
built up.
interesting. If this had been wet down here, even if it wasn't like an actual lake, if it had been like wetlands and this was all built up, because yeah, this whole thing is all set up on platforms. You don't get the sense that any of this, except for that place underneath the
which could be a boat dock for all we know.
Right. Yeah. Everything seems.
This is near the Paranoia Palace too, where everything was weird walkways over spiders and stuff.
Right. Towers. You know, I'm not seeing much in the way of living quarters here.
No, me neither.
But that makes a certain amount of sense as well. Because we are pretty far off towards the frontier here now. Okay. Oh, that's not a ruin. Those are standing stones over there, right?
Where? Yeah. That's where the Earthkin. That's an Earthkin.
Standing stones, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Where'd everybody go?
I'm sorry, I crossed the bridge. All right. So here's one thing that I wonder. These different fortresses all correspond to each other, right? I mean, you've got this fortress across the street from Oscaruth, and you've got the one high up on the hill. I'm forgetting their names already.
And then the ones across the trestle span.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, Minas Ariel does not have a corresponding Rudauran fortress because that's past Amonsul, and so that's past the Rudauran border.
Yes.
This one that's right here underneath, that's on the north side of the road, right under Weathertop, the first one that we explored, seems to be the end. That's the sort of southwestern frontier of Rudaur there, it would seem, right underneath Amonsul. My question is, can we make any guess as to which came first? That is, were these Arthedanian fortresses here first, and then the Rudaurans came and built fortresses across from them, or did it work the other way around? I would guess.
I don't know.
I think it's.
Oh, look, 5 kings.
Huh?
5 kings again.
Oh, where?
On the big tall tower behind the top gazebo.
Ah, yes.
I somehow think that's the biggest clue as to which of these came first, but I'm not sure.
I wonder, we were speculating that might be Isildur and his 4 sons. That was one of the best theories that I heard about that. Given that
there's that statue on top of the gazebo, too.
Yes. Looks decapitated.
Yes. What's he holding, though? Is that the same one we saw?
I think it's the standard gazebo statue. Is that the one with like the dude who looks like he's a wizard holding a sword?
Staff or a sword, yes.
Yeah. Huh. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, so here's my thought.
Yeah.
My thought is, so in at least one sense, Arthedain came first, right? I mean,
Yes.
they all kind of splintered off from the same kingdom, but I can't imagine Arthedain's. I mean, if you look at the big map, right? Look at the map, and then I scroll out and look at the really big map. The center of power for Arthedain was in the North Downs, right? I mean, it was Fornost up here in the North Downs. So, oh, sorry, I just lost it. Before Rudour was a threat, it's harder for me to imagine the Arthedanian rulers building out these fortresses on the south side of the road, especially as they are doing, like they are clearly situated, they're pointed north, right? They're pointed towards, they're oriented towards the fortresses in the north. So I'm thinking that, but again, the whole kingdom was in the north. This was pretty near the southernmost boundary of the entire kingdom of Arnor.
Yeah.
Effectively. So I'm thinking that the fortresses on the north side of the road came first and were part of like the southern boundary. And then when Rudour claimed them, right, and like put their little crowns all over them, then Arthedain built these ones down here in the south so that they would have, to sort of expanding their frontier with Rudour to kind of keep the Rudourans in check and prevent them from expanding southwards.
Yes. That makes sense.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
And would also explain why places like Oscaruth up in the north, assuming, as I am indeed assuming, that it's a Rudauran fortress, looks much more like a city that people would live in, whereas this does not. This is more...
Yeah, this looks more like
like an
military.
Outpost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like you might build if you were trying to, watch over an enemy nearby. Ooh.
Yeah, I want to look at the gazebo down here and figure out what's down here, because this is...
I forgot about
definitely
the swimming pool.
Yeah. Remnants of a hidden spring or a waterway down here. Who knows?
I mean, this is definitely Rudauran. This looks like a...
Yeah.
This looks like a bath or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like a Roman bath, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some fallen columns down there.
The water looks so inviting too. You just want to splash around in it, don't you?
Especially contrasted with the red water on the other side of the hill.
Yeah, this is the nicest water in the entire area.
Yes, it is. In all of the Lonelands, really.
Yeah, in all the Lonelands. And it is still full of spiders.
Well, there's that, but, if you can get over that.
If you can't handle me at my full of spiders, you don't deserve me at my not full of spiders.
What is at the apex of the... above the... scepter?
Star.
Is it It's a star superimposed on the Rudauran crown.
Yeah, it looks like it was cut in later. Some sort of tools.
Oh, that's really interesting. You can see them both. You can see the star, but you can see the Rudauran crown.
The crown and behind it. That is interesting. I've never seen that in the game.
I've never noticed that. So, theory.
Mm-hmm.
Theory is that this was originally... I think the star came first and they kind of carved the crown on top of it.
It looks more like the other way because you see the bits of the trim that are gouged out.
Yeah.
It looks like the star's been superimposed over the crown.
So this place, what, trying to reclaim it for Rudar? You'd think they would, or for Arthedain?
Arthedain, yeah.
After the fall of Rudar? But
it could
no,
be.
I mean, the fall of Rudar is pretty much the end of Arthedain, too.
It looks pretty sharp and new. Maybe these Eglain people did it. Let's take a look inside and see if they altered anything else.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, it's possible that the Dunedain could have tried to erase the Rudaran crown, but you'd think they'd been a little more thoroughgoing. I mean, there's two other huge crowns right there, which they could easily deface. And, of course...
Yeah, but the star goes on the top.
Yeah, the Rudaran stuff all over the place, just as we expected. No surprise now.
Yeah.
You could see, even just from the color of the stone from a distance, this greenish stone was Rudaran.
Man, the Arthedanians and Rudarans must have had fantastic calves with all the stairs around here.
It's so true. Okay, I'm seeing...
Alright, let's split up and look for clues, gang.
Yeah, I
see the guard tower's been bricked up.
Big, huge archway. Right up here. Okay.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that.
We've got the two crowns with the scepter beneath the arch, and then the king on top.
Yes.
Okay, we've seen that pattern before.
Yeah.
Same thing here on the bottom end.
Yeah.
And... Okay, but we're not seeing the same kind of Gothic arch with that, the pointy arch with the... I wonder how that tower would have ended if it weren't broken down. Okay, so I think all these rounded arches are going to be the same. Yes, they are. Do we have any non-rounded arches? Any of those? I want to see if we can find another superimposition.
See, we got this area over here is nothing.
Yeah.
Oop, low ceiling.
Yeah.
That is a functional ceiling right there.
Huh.
Okay.
The tops of those towers are just strange.
Yeah, they look like rib cages.
Yeah, they look very half-hearted attempts of the towers in Illuminous. Do you think that's what they were going for?
It definitely seems like a culture that lost the art of the domed ceiling.
Yes. Like, we know there should be 4 pointy bits up at the top of the tower, but we don't really remember how to do that properly. So we're going to make it instead look like, a hand with broken and reset fingers up at the top.
It looks like some medieval illustration of the Tower of Babel.
I mean, it kind of does, actually.
Oh, here we go. Broken wall. What we got up here?
Yeah, all we get are those rounded arches anywhere. We get them in a bunch of places with the scepter and the 2 crowns. Like even in smaller version on this little door that they bricked up for some reason.
Probably to keep people from messing around in the guard tower.
Yeah. We got like the Cask of Amontillado in here, so... Yeah.
Instead... For the love of God, Montresor! I just did an illustration of that for RavenCon.
Oh, yeah?
I had fun doing that, yeah. I tried to do like all Corman-esque too, with all these wild Technicolor lights everywhere. I like Corman's interpretation of Poe. It's a little groovy, but very fun.
Cool. Well, it looks like the skeletal bits at the top of the tower are definitely fragmentary, so we can't judge them too much on their current state, because it's clearly not what they were intended to be like.
Yeah.
But it's hard to see what they were. intending to be like.
It almost looks like some sort of fin.
Yeah, it does look like a fin.
I wonder if we've seen it anywhere else and it was complete. We just don't recognize it.
Huh.
All the bricks are sideways, too. Looks very impractical. Let's see. Go along this way.
Yeah,
Ooh, we can.
I want to go, yeah, we can. I want to go outside and around the other side over here. I saw another, what was it, gate or something over here?
Oh, can I get on here?
Wait,
yes, I can.
Hang on.
Hey.
Up here by the reflecting pool, we have another Gothic arch with huge, but there's no star superimposed on the crown.
Oh, you're right.
So this is what I was looking for. No star. Huh.
There we go.
Interesting. But they did superimpose the star in the ruins of the bath?
Yeah. You wonder, well, Radagast the Brown's supposed to be in this building. I wonder if that was just his little joke when he was passing through.
What, the star?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
I mean, he's the only one who could do something like that so quickly. Skirmish camp.
I don't see anything else much interesting on the side of the walls over here. I thought there was a... I thought I saw another thing sticking up like one of those kings. Which I still
looks
think
like a
look weird.
Gondor wing helmet kind of thing.
Yeah. Ooh, hang on a second. From this side, look up at the fins. Look up at the tower.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was an arch facing this way. See, look, those things arch together. They're not curved around to the center.
It just looks that way from a distance.
It was a big ol' arch. It almost looks like a and there is the king. I knew I saw one over here. So there's a king sticking up above that on the squat tower, the one that's in the curtain wall here.
Oh yes.
So that almost looks like a huge, ginormous version of the
same thing. Like there would have been a statue of a king up there.
Yeah, like a big statue of the king up there.
Yeah, I could see that.
Huh. That's really weird.
Wonder why we don't have any ruins of statues around here.
Yeah, they all seem to be, set within their little, like, stone shrine things.
Maybe it was, like, just on a flag or a banner.
Maybe. Yeah, Deathman is wondering if those are swan wings. They don't look like.
Yeah, I was thinking they kind of look like a Gondor helmet.
Maybe. First of all, well, two things. First of all, have we seen any wings in architecture anywhere in Arnor? I don't think we have.
Not in Arnor. I think we've seen some stuff like that later on when we get to like Eregion and stuff.
Yeah, but we've not. Maybe in some of the Noldor things? Some of the Noldor ruins, like in the North Downs and Meluinen and other places like that?
Maybe.
But not in any of the Arnorian ruins, certainly.
No.
Not even in Innuminus. Again, in Innuminus we get the pointy bits at the top of the towers, but those aren't actually shaped like wings.
Yeah.
But this is, I'm really struck by this angle because you can tell that those arched directly towards each other on the side of the tower rather than coming in around the tower to the center. So that totally changes my view of what this was meant to look like.
Still, what purpose did it serve?
No idea.
Would it have been part of a ceiling, or is it just, hey, it's the top of the building?
Well,
Let's put something on
like
it.
this little king on top of the tower there is facing out.
It's like a weird birthday cake.
Yeah. It does look like a kind of a birthday cake topper, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's
like a
looking
badly placed one.
It's looking out to the east, which
Yes.
ignoring like the red business, which
Well, there's more ruins up there, too.
right, we've got this other fortress over here. They do all seem to be communicating with each other, the fortresses. Okay, see, look. Here, look at this tower up on the north side of town.
Mm-hmm.
Another ruin with similar bits. Though broken off at almost exactly the same points. But the interesting thing to me here about these is look at the other ones. What were they doing? The other two. So on the big tower from this angle, all we can see are the two sort of ribs on this side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which seemed like they did come together to make an arch on one side of the tower.
Uh-huh.
But the other ones, the ones on the west side of the tower, where did they connect? With each other?
Maybe they mirror.
Yeah, so there were going to be like two Gothic arches on each side of the tower?
Yeah. Come stand over here. You can see what
Where?
it was trying to do.
Where?
Right where my guy's standing. Over here.
Wait, which one is your guy?
Kofi with the reindeer and the black star shield.
Oh, and the reindeer. Okay, we're all up on the hill here.
Yeah. Come down here and you can see see where the arc is going to mirror the other arc.
Oh, you're looking up here.
Yeah.
Aha. Yes. Right. Clearly there were two. Because I was look, and there's another cake topper king dude looking off to the west here on this other side.
Yeah.
So they're totally symmetrical. I was looking up at
just the vigilant kings, I guess.
Where is it? This tower over here, which I now can't see from down here. I could see that better from up top.
Yeah.
Back from over here. From this hill. Yes, so the stonework behind the arches suggest that was enclosed. So you've got the two arches and stonework.
Like a vault kind of thing.
Yeah, like a tunnel or something, right? So that you had this sort of, what would it be?
Oh man, you'd get a draft through there.
Yeah, like sort of a steeple thing.
No, that'd blow the hair off your head.
Yeah.
You made a wind tunnel up there.
Yeah, Deathman is suggesting maybe a signal beacon. That's possible. It would have been shielded from the north and south so that it would only be visible from the east and west, which I suppose if your enemies are in the south there, you would build, right? But
it doesn't match any of the other guard towers, which are all rectangular, though.
Yes, and why would you build it on two of your towers in one place?
Yeah, this is a show-off tower.
Three of them. There's another one back behind there. You can see the broken off arches on that one too, up in the north.
Now this is a guy. This is built by a guy who, in any direction, he wanted to look up and see himself, or his ancestors.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the biggest of all of the Rudauran ruins.
Yeah.
I mean,
like you said, it's the one that's designed to live in.
Yeah. You would be if you were living in one of these places. This would be the place. Huh. Very interesting. Still not really sure I can imagine what that tower looked like when it was not a ruin.
Yeah. I kind of want to look at the stuff in Harlog and across the way to see more of it, but I don't know if we can protect Lowlies right now, and it's getting on midnight, but maybe we can.
Yeah, no, we should stop for
check
tonight.
That out another week.
Next time, what I want to do is I want to keep going. Of course, I want to go down into Garth Garwin. We'll do that, definitely.
Yeah.
But not first. I think what I want to do next is continue on out because there's no that fortress, the one that's due east of us, across the way there, that's the first one that does not have one corresponding to it across the way in the south, right?
Yes.
But I want to look. I know, of course, there are ruins down in the Harloweg, and I wanna check those out and see if those are Rudauran or Arthedanian.
Yeah.
And then we'll probably check out the last bridge, and then come back around and
come back around and do the
Garwin. Yeah.
Garthagarwin, yeah.
Yeah. And look around in there.
Any theories to put forth right now?
Let's see. Well, I'm thinking that's going to be Rudauran. You can tell by the color at this point. I'm pretty sure that's going to be Rudauran.
Yeah, and it matches the guard tower.
Yeah, it matches the guard tower. I'm pretty sure that everything in Garthagarwin is going to be Rudauran too. And that just sort of goes with what the whole idea of the Rudaurans claiming this southern frontier. If the Arthedanian kings then built those fortresses along the south in order to prevent the Rudaurans expanding south, and kind of keep them in check all along there, the question then becomes the Harloweg and whether, because that doesn't seem to serve the same purpose.
No, but I do think it is Arthedanian, but there's got kind of a labyrinth down there of something that used to be a bigger thing.
Well,
I need to take a look to figure out exactly what it was. I don't remember.
I would guess it would be Arthedanian just because they seem to have claimed everything south of the road here. And since it's south of the road, I would, that's what I would expect most. But I don't see the function of it like you can see the function of it.
Yeah, and it does have a clear function, but I don't think I've sat around and looked at it and thought what it was, though, because it's different than the other ones.
We'll try. We'll go down there to the Harloweg, and we'll go over to that. We'll start over that one across the way, and then we'll head down to the Harloweg and see what we find down there.
Okay, then.
That's where we'll go next week. But yes, it is getting late. We should go now. Thanks everybody for joining us this week for more poetry discussion, and then finally getting to the field trip here on Crick Hollow. Thank you for your patience, everybody, with my non-field trip last week. We will be back as usual next week, and as I said, we'll continue our exploration of the Lone Lands here, and we will move towards the attack of the Ringwraiths finally. So that'll be fun. So thanks everybody for joining me. Good night. Thanks for joining me on this epic exploration of The Lord of the Rings and of Standing Stone's video adaptation of Tolkien's story. If you are having even half the fun I'm having on this journey, I hope you will consider supporting the project by donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.